Hello everyone, my name is AJ, and I don't have a good intro. I've been working on a completely reworked version of Hell to go along with my rewrite of Spindlehorse's Has-Been Hotel and Hell of a Boss, and I wanted to dedicate a video to talking about the world building. Vivzie Pop is notorious for having half-baked world building, especially in Hell of a Boss, where rules that she sets up will matter when it helps force the plot along, but are ignored when they become an inconvenience. The societal structures of Hell I've already talked about in previous videos, though not to their fullest extent. Those will come up more over time as I flesh out my world. What I actually wanted to talk about today is environments. There's so many things that you can do with environments that affect the world and characters in so many ways that it's a real shame that Vivzie's version of Hell is so limited and borderline lacking in imagination. In Vivzie's story, there are 7 rings of Hell, and we've seen most of them except for Envy. These rings are supposed to be stacked on top of each other and can be traveled to via train, elevator, and helicopter? This isn't something that's taken advantage of very well because most of the environments we go to are cities, so traversing rings feels more like moving from one city district to another rather than different levels of caves. Distance isn't conveyed well either. Characters seem to teleport around the world at will, which makes the world feel incredibly tiny. This does make sense for traveling to Earth since there's no other way to get there presumably, but this video game warping around the world of Hell does come off a little bit like Rings of Power warping. Now, of course, Hell of a Boss isn't a super serious show, and while I think the warping is a wasted opportunity because it robs time of the ability to be a dramatic device, it doesn't hurt the show quite as much as it hurts Has-Been Hotel. The Pride Ring feels extremely small since Charlie was able to travel around most of it in a few hours, partially on foot and partially holding onto the back of a truck. This combined with Vox saying that thousands died in the exterminations serves to make the world feel incredibly small and denies it the significance of scale that Hell deserves. The settings in Vivzie's work, while often very pretty, do feel a bit like an afterthought. They clearly put a lot of effort into designing the way that it looks, but clearly weren't thinking about them that much when they were writing. They sometimes don't always think about the consequences of certain design decisions, which I think is conveyed best by the giant spinning green coin in Green Sky. What are the implications of this coin? Where did it come from? How did it get there? What consequences does this celestial body have on greed? And now that we're thinking about it, do the rings exist within a planet? Do they free float in space? Are they different realms? What on earth does Hell look like from the outside? I am very passionate about settings. Getting to draw and describe the environments in the first episode of the Bed and Breakfast for Former Baddies was my favorite part about that project. It hurt my soul to have to cut out a huge section of setting description from episode 2. I loved writing it, but it was getting in the way of the pacing, so it had to go. Point is, I wanted to redesign and rewrite the world of Hell itself. Now, something important to keep in mind is that Vivzie's Hecaverse takes a soft world-building approach to its story, where specific mechanics will often go unmentioned and only loosely explored, and very rarely explained, which isn't a bad thing in and of itself. There are definitely ways to make soft world building and soft magic systems work, but I have a preference for hard world building, which is the style I'll be using in my version. This means I'll be creating a lot more verisimilitude rather than engaging in good faith suspension of disbelief more often than not. I wanted to start with the solar system and planet. In my sect of Christianity, we believe that God's kingdom is next to the celestial body Kolob, which is either a star or planet, no one's quite sure which. I tend to default to the lore of my religion because obviously I consider my sect to be the most correct, otherwise I would be in a different sect. So logically, if heaven is in the universe, out in space, hell should also be in the universe, out in space. Now, in reality, according to most sects, including my own, hell is not an actual place. It is a state of being, and demons live here on Earth, but don't have bodies. We are changing this, though, because hell being a place is a lot more fun and serves itself better to being a dramatic device for this story. Since the rings of hell are described as being stacked on top of each other, both in Vivzie's lore as well as in Dante's Inferno, where a lot of popular ideas of hell came from, I thought it would be cool if hell was a cone shape, so each ring gets smaller and smaller. But Is that possible? Is it possible for a planet-sized object to take the shape of a cone? I could have just said screw it and did what I wanted to do with no regard for the laws of physics, but I decided to do some research about this to see if it was actually possible. I had to use ChatGPT for most of the calculations because I am not an astronomer and the math is really complex and scary and requires a lot of numbers that I don't understand. I'm an accountant major. I'm not a scientist. And I just wanted to be completely honest with you. I am an idiot. And through these calculations, I discovered that a cone-shaped planet is possible. When a bunch of mass comes together, it forms a center of gravity, and this center of gravity is constantly pulling everything towards itself. That's why when things get really, really big, they tend to turn into spheres, because everything is being pulled towards the middle at a consistent rate. That's why you fall towards the Earth no matter what side of the planet you're on, you're always being pulled towards the middle. This presents a challenge for creating a cone-shaped planet-sized structure, since most materials aren't dense enough to be able to resist the pull of a planet's core. If we made hell out of regular rock, the tip of the cone wouldn't be able to preserve itself, but a material as dense as diamond would be able to withstand that. So if we make hell's outer shell out of a material as dense as diamond, we can have our cone. I took a little bit of inspiration from Minecraft's nether portals and gave this material a similar appearance to obsidian, and I've decided to name it Devil's Bone, and I'll explain why in a little bit. We'll get to it. So we've got our planet, now we need our suns. A lot of solar systems, I believe the majority, but I can't be certain, are binary solar systems, and that's just so stinking cool that I can't say no. In the bed and breakfast for former baddies, the sky was always drawn as being reddish, so I wanted to make at least one of its stars red. I could have made them both red, but variety is fun. So I made its bigger sun a red dwarf and its smaller sun a white dwarf. Hell orbits around both of them, and the stars orbit around each other. White dwarfs are dimmer and cooler than red dwarfs, so summertime would be when Hell is orbiting Inferno, and winter would be when it's orbiting Calamity. There are 3 planets that orbit Infinity, which is Ragnarok, Armageddon, and Nibiru, and there's 1 planet that orbits only Calamity, which I named Purge, and there are 4 planets that 4 dwarf planets that circle around both of them on the outside, which I named after the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: conquest, war, famine, and death. And then around all of that, encircling the whole system, is the Chains of Hell, which is an asteroid belt. I also gave Hell a very small, teeny little moon that I named Dante. For obvious reasons. This moon has a very specific orbit, so it can only be seen. It's only ever going to be seen in one section of the sky, only ever at night, and only during one half of its orbit. So this moon is only seen about half the time, since it spends most of its time circling the edge of the world. Because Hell needs to be so close to both stars in order to make the environment warm enough for human survival, it never really gets dark, only dimmer, since at least one sun would always be out. In the summertime, daytime would be red, and nighttime would have the dwarf as a really bright moon. This would be flipped in wintertime. Fun fact, it is wintertime during the events of the bed and breakfast for former baddies, and I am so happy that all of the night scenes have a bright red sky. The day scenes, not so much, because I hadn't thought about that when the backgrounds were made, but it's fine, we'll just fix that later. We'll retcon it to make Vaggie just not know that information. Something else I'm excited for is that 2 suns means that everything outside is going to have 2 shadows, which makes the structure, the lighting system a little bit more interesting and makes Hell feel very unique. Because Hell isn't round, it wouldn't be considered a planet, rather it would be considered a mega-asteroid, which is currently a classification of theoretical astrology. Moving back to Hell, the Pride Ring is the only ring on the surface of the planet on that flat spot. Within Pride are 9 circles: Limbo, Lust, Gluttony, Greed, Hatred, Heresy, Violence, Fraud, and Treachery. These are the names of the circles according to Dante's Inferno, and I thought having circles within rings would be a good way to break up the Pride Ring into smaller sections and combine multiple versions of Hell into the same universe. In my first concept map, I drew it so the rings are spiraling down according to the golden ratio. The golden ratio is a ratio that appears in nature a lot, so I thought I would include it here as well. Each circle gets deeper and deeper, and the way this formed is from Lucifer clashing into the asteroid. He angled himself so that when he crashed, he would skim along the surface and come to a painful but safe stop, the alternative being that he would have either missed the asteroid entirely and kept hurtling through eternal darkness forever, or the wrong angle would have ended with him destroying the planet and getting stuck in orbit around the 2 suns, possibly even losing enough speed until he was consumed by the larger one, and thus trapped in eternal burning until it supernovaed and sent him back into eternal darkness again. His crash into that planet carved in the spiral descent and sent it spinning along its axis, which is near perfectly vertical through the middle like a top. That crash pushed up the mountains around the edge and inner spiral. The other mountains that appear inside of the crash site which would have flattened in his fall, were created afterwards the regular way through earthquakes and volcanic activity. When Lucifer's fall finally stopped, he was able to summon his most precious fallen angels to him. His army swore allegiance to him, handing their souls over to him to turn him into the first dragon. Not all of his fallen angels were able to be summoned to him, though, some either not fully giving him their soul, being forgotten, or having been trapped in black holes that not even light can escape. Whether on Hell's surface I took a lot more liberties with, if I was going for perfect realism, the center would be the hottest, with the outer rim being the coolest, but I've inverted this. The Treachery Circle in Dante's Inferno is completely iced over, and I wanted to keep this the same. Since Treachery is the deepest circle but isn't deep enough down into the asteroid to feel the warming effects of its core, it is extremely cold. The high mountains around it keep the already dim light out, which further increases this. The shallower circles get warmer and warmer, with the warmest parts being the canyon on the other side of the inner circle where the Heaven Embassy is stationed. Hell is still a state of being, just as much as it can be on the Devil's Asteroid. True hell is stagnation, the inability to improve. Humans are meant to be eternal creatures, eternity being a state of endless improvement. Hell is the exact opposite of that. Satan decided to name his new world Hell as an expression of his misery and the agony of all those unfortunate enough to fall into his arms. Hell is about a third of the size of Earth, and just to be certain that this would be large enough, I did some calculations, and so long as the population density is the same as a normal city, there's more than enough room to fit the entire population of Earth in here a few times over. Most of Pride is going to be cities and towns, since there are so many people living there. Each circle has its unique quirks to it, all inspired by Dante's Inferno. Limbo is the most normal, but does get very hot, so the residents that live there have no choice but to be nocturnal. Most of Hell follows the same rules. Hell and Earth time is only different by a few hours, Hell having 28-hour days rather than 24, which is why most demons still function on nocturnal clocks even when they're on Earth. They have to purposely switch to daytime hours, which most don't do since their business is best accomplished at night anyway. Limbo is also the closest to usual depictions of Hell, fire, brimstone, but ultimately not that bad unless you're an idiot that likes to walk into fire. Lust experiences a lot of nasty storms, especially tornadoes. The way that tornadoes form, at least from my understanding, is a combination of warm, wet air near the Earth's surface combined with cool air from above. Apply wind and a thunderstorm and you should have a tornado. Lust has a lot of geysers and has more mountains than most places that redirect the air in circular shapes, so when it gets cold at night you get a lot of storms and lots of tornadoes. There are plenty of tornadoes that frequent Pride's surface, but their movements are usually fairly predictable paths and they're usually not that bad. It's only in Lust where they tend to get the most destructive. There are also some tornadoes that formed thousands of years ago and just never die and never move. So there's like at least one eternal tornado. I just have yet to figure out where to place it. Hopefully I've done that when I drew the maps. Gluttony is full of sulfur vents, methane swamps, and tar pits, so that circle absolutely reeks and diseases spread quickly. Sinners that are visiting the area might wear masks similar to plague doctor masks, where it'll have a snout or beak-shaped attachment full of herbs to block out the smell. People that actually live there get used to the smell over time and eventually come to find smells they used to enjoy repulsive. Greed is famous for its golden lava. Those that live too close to the active volcanoes that still spew golden flecks in their smoke are at risk of unique diseases like golden lung, conditions that come from breathing in too much gold. Gold isn't toxic by itself, so breathing in a little bit isn't going to kill you, but if you're going to be outside a lot, best to wear a mask just in case. The anger circle, which will be renamed hatred very soon in universe, has lakes of blood in it. It's not actually blood, of course, but it is very similar. The water is extremely iron dense and full of microscopic red creatures that will bloom like algae under the right conditions that make the water feel very sludgy and thick like blood. There aren't a lot of sources of natural water in Pride, most water instead being imported from lower rings, so these water sources are heavily coveted resources that warlords fight over constantly so they can have the exclusive right to purify and sell it. Heresy is full of fire, lots of cold fire specifically. Hellfire is actually very cold instead of hot. Sinners, when turned to salt, become an element undiscovered on Earth that burns when refined and excited when it comes into contact with sufficient kinetic force. This salt can also be found in nature on Hell and occurs most frequently in Heresy. The salt here is almost like sand because there's so much of it. It is different from refined Sinner salt because it's in a less stable form, so ignites much more easily. There's plenty of regular hot fire here too, but most of it is cold and it spreads very quickly. Violence is a never-ending manhunt. It doesn't have a super unique setting. Violence is where all pedophiles go, and they're very clearly marked with a very light dusty pink and a dark maroon. Violence is a very flat area of marshes, wet only because of spilt blood, not from water. That means there's only man-made places to hide, and everyone else in the circle, even other rapists, love hunting pedophiles for sport. There are bands of pedophiles that group together to protect themselves, but they are not well established and not doing good. Fraud is full of smoke, so it's impossible to see anything in there and next to impossible to breathe in without wearing a mask. This is the worst circle to spawn in because if you can't get out within an hour, you're going to be unconscious until someone either saves you or until an angel puts you out of your misery permanently. That is unless Lucifer designs you with the ability to breathe smoke or without the need to breathe. This circle is mainly intended to keep a clear separation between sinners and Hell's royalty that live in Treachery. Treachery is an eternally frozen wasteland, and this is where Lucifer's castle and archives are, along with his most favorite families of Goetia. In the original Has-Been Hotel, Hell has two celestial bodies near it, the first being the Black Moon, or Sun, I'm not quite sure, and the second being Heaven itself. It's unclear which of these bodies Hell orbits around, or if Hell is so big that these bodies orbit around Hell like moons. Whatever the case, this places Heaven extremely close to Hell, and I will be changing this in my version. Heaven is positioned in the center of the universe where the Big Bang originated. In my version, rather than being a singular planet, Heaven is an entire galaxy. Galaxies always have black holes at their center, so I'm going to appropriate the name of Kolob for this black hole. While you can see Heaven from Hell, it requires the usage of extremely powerful telescopes, more powerful than anything that we have here on Earth. These telescopes would run on the magic that passed down through Stolas' family. Heaven would be easy to tell apart from other galaxies because it's constantly producing planets and stars, which it sends out into the universe so that the universe is constantly expanding. Heaven would be extremely bright for that reason, which makes it easy to identify. This is the real reason why everyone who's trapped in Hell can't get to heaven in my version. It is unfathomably far away and can't be traveled to through normal means. Angels can make the trip from heaven to hell fairly easily because heaven has full access to all 10 dimensions. In order to get into these other dimensions at will, you have to be given certain keys, and your mind and body need to be ascended so that you can process what's happening. At this current point in the timeline, no one has been given access to use of the 4th dimension at will. There are a few higher up angels that can access other dimensions like the 5th, 6th, and 7th, which is the imagination, past, and future, respectively. To be clear, since the concept of dimensions is so theoretical, I am completely making up everything after the 4th dimension. Access to these 3 dimensions is visual only. Angels would only be able to travel between them if they could access the 4th dimension, which is time. Angels are, however, allowed temporary access to the 4th dimension for the purposes of space travel between Earth, Hell, Purgatory, and any other inhabited planet. Purgatory is a rogue planet in the middle of the triangle between Earth, Heaven, and Hell. This means that it has no sun, so all of its light has to come from that planet. This planet has no ecosystem and is fairly small. Its population is made up entirely of the souls of the dead before they're sorted into their respective kingdoms. This planet consists of the gates of heaven, which surround the portal structure that sends souls to heaven to receive their bodies. There is also a city of judgment halls, which are heaven-made structures that produce their own heat and atmospheres to keep the gargoyles, seraphim, and other heavenly creatures that work in them comfortable. This is where Sarah and Gabriel live permanently since their duties lie here. There is also a huge population of missionaries and nuns that live there to re-educate souls that were judged good but haven't had their work completed yet. This includes the unbaptized or unendowed, or those that didn't have a fully formed concept of right and wrong and thus need to be taught from scratch how to be proper members of heaven society. Perfectly normal angels are allowed to visit Purgatory and to visit their family members that are in these programs, but are forbidden from mingling with the unjudged population. That's part of why this planet has no sun, is to keep angels separated from unjudged souls, which helps reduce fallings by preventing susceptible angels from throwing themselves into hell to be with their unworthy family members. Souls that are sent to hell have their own portal that they go through, but since there is no equivalent portal on the other side to prevent demons from getting into Purgatory, these souls will spawn in completely random places, with only the severity of their sin sorting them into different circles. For example, lust, gluttony, and greed are all considered to be the same severity, so a soul sent to lust very well might end up in greed purely by accident. Most people do tend to spawn on the ground, but it is possible to spawn inside of buildings or in the air. There have been some people that have spawned in Lust's permanent tornado and then just been trapped there until taken out by angels. Now, rings! Oh boy, rings! So, there are 7 rings, and these rings are stacked on top of each other. Pride is the only one at the surface, the rest are underground. Between each ring is a thick layer of Devil's Bone to preserve the structural integrity of the asteroid, but they also each have their own biomes and materials inside. Wrath is a volcanic desert. It does generate enough precipitation to sustain plant life, but because of acidic rain and toxins from the volcanoes, it can only grow a select handful of very hardy plants. Its lighting comes almost entirely from lava and Behemoth's magic. I think that the tiny suns that were floating above the volcanoes in the original Hell of a Boss are super cool, so I'm keeping those and turning them into a spell that comes from Behemoth. Otherwise, Wrath would be incredibly dark. Underneath Wrath is Gluttony. This one is a jungle-type environment, very hot, very muggy. Most plants on Hell, with the exception of Pride's plants, extract energy from the environment from heat rather than sunlight. A few of these plants were described in the first episode. The 2 plants we have so far are sweating trees and a smaller, currently unnamed plant that looks like it's made out of boils of human skin. Chlorophyll isn't a common adaptation for plants to have here, so plants don't have to be green, and in fact only occasionally are, and only in certain rings. Most plants have a skin or flesh-like texture to them, but will be cool to the touch if they are healthy. Since they don't produce heat, they absorb it and turn it into something else. Since they don't need light in order to exist, this ring doesn't have any natural non-organic light. Rather, there is an abundance of plants that produce light as a byproduct of their chemical processes. There are also plenty of creatures in this environment that produce light as well. Greed is underneath Gluttony and is lit mainly by glowworms that live on its ceiling and glowing stones. Greed also has an abundance of methane and copper swamps that are often on fire. It is by far the darkest of the topmost rings. Underneath Greed is a very thick section of crust, then the mantle, outer core, and inner core. This is why no one has ever been to the bottom of Greed. The closer you get to the core, the more intense the gravity gets. So if you did get to the bottom, gravity would be too intense and you would get stuck. On the opposite side of the core are Sloth, Envy, and Lust. Sloth is the closest ring to the core and as such has stronger gravity than any of the other rings. It's not so extreme that it's impossible to move there, but it is a big culture shock for visitors. Most of the creatures that live here tend to be smaller because gravity restricts them more. Sloth is mainly plain land, it's very flat, with the only differences being occasional blood bogs or regular hot springs and rivers. On top of Sloth is Envy. The Envy ring is by far the deepest of the rings, maybe not the biggest but definitely deepest, and has almost no light at all. It is a freshwater ocean that is very similar to the abyssal level of our own ocean. Animals here either have no eyes or sight at all, or will produce their own light. Most animals and hellborn that live here lead very solitary lives. Because a society with no light and very limited resources to build permanent structures is almost impossible to maintain, Leviathan lives on the ocean floor in a castle of steam vents, caverns, and extremely impressive coral structures. This is the only place in the ring where any sort of society can function, because it's one of the only places that has permanent structures to live in. Even still, this city is very loosely populated because Leviathan has a nasty habit of eating or mutilating people she doesn't like or is jealous of, so people tend to dump their eggs here and then get the heck out of Dodge before they can draw her attention. Lust is the smallest ring since it's closest to the tip. This ring used to be very similar to ancient Egypt, where it was mostly arid grassland and savanna made prosperous by its big rivers and lakes, but Asmodeus has a nasty habit of getting caught doing bad stuff on Earth by archangels and getting in serious trouble for it. His ring used to resemble the Babylonians culturally, since Asmodeus's mother is the whore of Babylon, but after some earthly shenanigans, he got beat up by the archangel Raphael, fled to Egypt, and then was bound there, which facilitated a massive cultural shift in that ring. He was specifically bound underneath the Nile River. He was eventually able to escape, but in doing so, flooded his ring so it now resembles the Earth's surface during the Cambrian explosion. This means it's like a very shallow sea, usually ranging in depths from 5 to 10 feet with occasional sinkholes that lead to Envy, and little islands that Ozzy never leaves. He's a fire demon and hates water. His ring is by far the brightest and is the only one of the underground rings that has a proper day and night cycle. He has a very friendly relationship with the Goetias and commissioned a spell from him that gave his ring the illusion of a sky. It's also why there are some floating islands there, is to keep himself away from the water, which he also commissioned. The top 4 rings are connected by a series of winding tunnels that anyone can walk through. The lower 3 can be accessed by scaling Pride's outer mountains to get to the edge of the world. From there you can find openings that will let you in. It's more common to go through proper portals to get between rings and circles, these portals being under the direct control of the Goetia. These portals only open up during certain times of day, and you do need to pay a fee in order to use them, about the equivalent of a plane ticket to a different country, which will get more expensive depending on which ring you're going to. That is all I have for now. I will of course be expanding this as the project goes on and as individual rings beyond Pride get their own circles and maps. I have merchandise that you should buy that is only available until the end of the month. I also take commissions and I have a Patreon. A big thank you to all of my financial supporters: JRDS, CDN Redneck 05, Immortal Jesse, Mercer Scott Holt, The Fun Guy, Chase Johnson, Honey, Lunar Resident 23, Lily, and Silent Savvy. Thank you all so much for watching, and don't forget to crash into the like button. Bye-bye!